Hello, and welcome back to Getting to the Top, where we interview transformational leaders about their leadership journey. Today, I have the absolute honor of interviewing Melanie Jamieson, and I've met Melanie is the co-CEO of Leaders Quest, and Leaders Quest is an absolutely transformational organization that forces us to think about information differently and to think about how we do things differently. And just through my engagement with her, I thought it was such a great organization. And then when she was appointed co-CEO, I thought, phenomenal. This is a great time to have this conversation with her. She focuses on expertise on building bridges between different perspectives to enable bold action for a sustainable and equitable world. She leads Leaders Quest work with the climate champions to drive radical collaboration across non-state actors towards climate goals. And I've worked with Melanie during COP27, and she worked on COP26, and we're looking forward to COP28. But she also helps companies to navigate purpose and profit, which is such an important thing that we need to do now, and build thriving cultures to be a force for good. What I didn't know before having this conversation is that Melanie is a professional singer-songwriter, and she spent her early years empowering at-risk youth in marginalized communities through music, where she first learned about harnessing the power of voice and harmony to drive sustainable change. So I think such a great foundation and such a fabulous journey to where she is now. So welcome, Melanie. Is there anything that you'd want me to include in your introduction?
Racquel, I've been listening to your fabulous videos, podcast over the last few days, and I was kind of prepared for this moment of thinking, okay, my bio will be read, but I wasn't prepared for how it would feel. But it's such a privilege to be with you, and thank you. Maybe the one thing I can add is, coming from Australia. I've been in the UK now for about 18 years, but I still think I have my roots very much in Australia, where a lot of my family is based. So that's the one thing I'd add. But thank you. And it's a real privilege to be with you and to continue many of our great conversations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, she's helping people at the highest levels in some of the most iconic organizations across the globe to have this shift in perspective. And I think that that's so important and required in this time. And I'm really delighted to know that we have leaders like you ushering people through those types of changes, because it is the necessary conversation of our day. How do we move from just thinking about profit and thinking about purpose, and making sure that we're making the right decisions for the right reasons, not just for the immediate term, but for the long term as well. So what does that feel like for you in being responsible for taking so many people through that journey?
So I think, for me, the way that you describe it's really key. The global economy is being called to change in ways that we've never even imagined. And I think there's so much effort being put into that change, and we have so many of the solutions and the technical skills at play. But I think where we really often experience the big gaps is really around the human software, if you like, the human behaviors, the mindsets, the skills that you've just described to really make the most of that change. And I think that we can't afford to keep getting stuck. And that in my experience, I think that, one of the key things is that leadership and that collaboration are kind of like accelerators, and that we might have all of the infrastructure in place ready for a change, but without that sort of sense of purpose, of agency, of alignment, of a willingness to go together, further, faster, we can't make the most of all of that, good foundations that have been put in place for the change that we need.
Yeah. So how did you move from, normally I ask people, how did you start? How did you discover your love of this journey? But I'm dying to understand how you moved from music into this. So tell me about that, and then we'll go back to what you thought you'd do as a child, and then we'll get into the journey.
So my career path's definitely been quite windy, and I started off in Australia as a singer-songwriter, and I come from a family of musicians. My grandfather was a jazz drummer. My uncle was a drummer as well. My mother was an opera singer. She did opera at school. She didn't become a professional. And through that family, they had all got to a point in Australia where they really needed to make a choice and actually a sacrifice to choose family and a steady job. And, you know, I felt that sense of loss in that side of my family. They had, you know, very sort of, you know, big passion for music. And my grandfather had chosen to work in a tire factory after playing on stage with some of the jazz greats in Australia, with Sammy Davis Jr., with Louis Armstrong, you know, so he did really well. And then in order to make a living, he needed to go off and run a tire factory. And that happened through that side of my family. And when I was young, I wanted to play the piano. I studied classical piano. I sang a little like my mother. And when I went to university, I met a whole bunch of musicians and I just formed a band. It was nothing I'd ever thought of doing professionally, but it really, you know, sparked some, you know, big energy for me. And I spent a number of years as a professional musician, but of course I had to make a living just like my family before me. But I really didn't want to do something that felt out of alignment with that.
Mm.
And I was lucky enough to find some work with different organizations where I could support young people who were in marginalized communities. I worked with a lot of young people who were, and this is both in Australia and then in the UK, who were excluded from school in pupil referral units. From very diverse backgrounds, and you know, really incredible young people, but really struggling, and that might be at home or, you know, with their peers. And I just, you know, I very organically found a way to help bring music programs to those different communities. Not the music I'd studied, you know, so it was really about finding what local music resonated. So often it was hip hop or rap or something that I knew very little about, but actually that was, I think, part of the gift. That it wasn't me teaching, but actually holding a space for young people to really create and to find a sense of identity, both individually and in groups. And I did this for a number of years. And I think, you know, in those days, I talked very much about empowerment. And I think this was very much about helping people think about who they are and who they want to be in the world. And I watched young people grow incredibly and be able to reintegrate back into school and into their communities, really from finding their own sense of voice. And now I look back many years later, and I think it's leadership.
Yeah.
It's the work I do, but with a very different audience.
Yeah.
But of course, in those days, I wasn't thinking of it like that.
But I think it's so
And
important, the issue of empowerment, the issue of doing something that feels authentic, the issue of aligning what you're passionate about with the work that you do and having purpose wrap all of that together, really would have given you such a great sense. And I love that idea of you're doing music with these kids and you don't, it's not sort of your core music, but you're learning along with them, or you're learning something new as well, and you're getting a gift in this transaction.
yeah, I think that's key actually. And I think that's also key to helping leaders learn. You know, we don't
Mhm.
teach leaders. You know, we create a space where leaders can come together to learn, to cross-pollinate. There are so many different styles and approaches to leadership. And I think I look back, and the work that I did with young people was very similar. It was recognizing that um, creating the space to allow them to go on their journey, I think, was the key differentiator for me, rather than teaching them, you know, what I knew.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I think as well, we need to be aware of how we learn and how I think when something feels like it comes from you, you are so more likely to embrace it versus someone comes with an idea and says, "Oh, this is what you should think," or "This is what you should be," versus holding that space and finding the people who can help you to hold that space so that you figure out, what do I think? What do I care about? What do I think is important? Yeah?
Right, right. We talk a lot about what we call the inner game of leadership. And I think in the world, in our education system, we spend a lot of time, and rightly so, on the outer game.
Mhm.
And that's the technical skills and knowledge that we need to do all the different roles that we play in the world. When we don't often hold as much time and attention on the inner game of leadership. And we think about this at Leaders Quest as the difference between being smart and being wise. And so I think we really try to create a space for people to develop their wisdom, for them to think about who they are, where they've come from, the things that are important to them and the communities that they serve, and then how to really bring that into their organizations and the work that they do.
Oh, phenomenal. All right. So then now let's get to your growing up as a little girl in Australia. Did you think, okay, I'll be a musician. This is my identity. This is who my family is. Or did you think I'll what were you thinking about?
So I was flip-flopping about. On the other side, my dad was a journalist, a foreign correspondent, and I grew up mostly watching him from behind the television, where I used to
Mm,
go and look for him because he was based in different regions in the world, particularly in the Middle East, and really spent his career telling stories about people who were living in conflict zones,
mhm,
but really showcasing the best of humanity in really difficult situations, but showing that it's often in cases like that where human beings really step up
yeah.
to change their own lives and those around them. And so I found this deeply inspiring. It did take him away from our family, so he left when I was young, and I didn't see a lot of him growing up. But I think, I often look at my two parents and I talk about getting voice and harmony from them. And, the harmony came from my mum's family, not just music, but also this sense of wanting to do good by the family and
Mhm,
giving up a sense of identity in order to serve. And then on my dad's side, this idea of voice.
yeah.
And both his own voice and really pursuing his purpose to the extent of leaving his young family, but also finding ways to uncover the voice of other people, often a kind of what we call at Leaders Quest the invisible giants, the hidden um, people who are doing incredible things around the world, who have so much to offer in terms
Yeah.
of helping us understand, how to bring about change.
So you're flip-flopping and then you're figuring out, is it music? Is it
Is is it journalism? Is it writing? They're probably the things that I played with. And so I studied communications at university while in a band. So I think I did a little bit of both. But I very quickly learned that being a journalist was not for me. I went off and I did I supported my dad on some documentaries. I found them uh, pretty grueling from an emotional point of
yeah,
view, and also recognizing that I wanted to stay and support the people that we were meeting and find
yeah.
ways to help them. And I think that everybody plays a different part in an ecosystem, and so telling the story is very important. But I kind of wanted to stay and see what more could happen in order to kind of bring about the change I wanted to see.
Okay.
So I left journalism and jumped into music.
And so then how did you move from music? How did you move out of music? Because this would have been
Yeah,
something in your DNA, would have been not just passion, not just purpose, but something, you know, generations behind you. So how did you manage to move out of that?
it certainly wasn't intentional, but I think I got to the point with my music where music had become a business for me. It cost
Mm.
me more money than I made. It was, a lot of hard work, and I'd done it. I'd created a couple of independent albums, so nothing big, and I really felt ready for something new. I'd also done a lot of work locally, and so whether that was in Australia or in London, I had spent a lot of time focused on local communities, and I really wanted to have a more global experience. And so I was really lucky to have a friend who had studied coaching, and she needed a guinea pig I got the chance to have some coaching sessions, and she helped me name what I wanted in a few words.
Mm.
And at that point, I thought there was a very long journey for me to make a shift, because my experience had been that career changes take years and years, and I had to go and study all these things and do all these internships, and I had a long list of hurdles actually to get me from where I was to where I wanted to be. And she helped me name what I wanted in a few words, which was really just an international communications role supporting communities. And
Mm.
once I got that out, I it's sort of one of the very old-fashioned ways of finding a job many years ago, looking in the newspaper. And there was this role for Leaders Quest, and I didn't know what it was about really, but it had travel. It
Mhm.
sounded exciting, and so I started interviewing. And 3 weeks later, I had my first day of work on the ground in Mumbai, working with our grassroots fellowship program, which was just incredible. One of the sort of most memorable experiences in my career. And it's where I recognized this, the fact that the work I'd done for so many years was building the foundations of understanding what leadership is, even though it looked different on the outside.
I like that your own journey to transition out of music came from this internal journey with a coach. And I always highly suggest coaches because I think, again, they focus on, and I've interviewed some really amazing coaches, Georgina Terry, Sharon Christopher, among others, who can help you to uncover what's already inside you and to put it, like you said, put a name to what you knew that you wanted, but just maybe couldn't find the words for. And figuring out what does that look like for me and how does this thing that I want to do manifest itself. So you are helping others uncover their own internal journey, and that started with you uncovering your own internal journey.
Right. I think that's right, and I think it's something we've got to keep continuing. I realize that I can't get comfortable here, right? I got to keep
Yeah,
thinking about what is the next
yeah,
iteration. I love the idea of this metaphor of when your ceiling becomes the floor, and I realized at that point, for me, it was like the ceiling was way up there. How do I get that international job? And of course, so many other iterations since then, but each time kind of realizing what next. And I think one of the things that we talk about in our programs is that we go on the journey with the leaders we work with. Again, we're not sitting on the outside and pointing and saying, we've done this before, here's the answer,
yeah.
where we learn alongside them.
Oh, I love that when your ceiling becomes the floor because, years ago, we were looking at some data about um, women in leadership. And we were looking at the fact that while there aren't enough women at the C-suite, there are many women in middle management. And so I think one of the speakers described it as not just the glass ceiling, but the sticky floor, where, you get in and you just stick to that floor and you don't come in thinking about, well, what's next? What's the next level? And how do, as you put it, how do I get this ceiling to become the floor? Because I need to keep getting to the next level. And that's all a part of not just my own career journey, but the greater good. Because if we have more diversity and equity and more participation across the board, we are going to have better results.
Right. It's so true. Um, I think you had Hala speaking, of
Yes,
course, last week, and I think she had some very powerful data that I'm afraid I'm not going to remember. But this sense of wasted human resource, there is
yes,
so much capacity, so much incredible ingenuity, imagination, empathy, all of that we are not making the most of.
yes.
And to really think about how do we unlock that in order to, you know, solve the biggest challenges of our time.
Yeah, I was just reading this week, and it was so surprising to me that the first female prime minister was appointed in like 1960. I was like, oh my gosh, that's just the other day. There are tons of
Yeah.
people walking around who were who were born before that. And I was just like, oh my gosh. I think sometimes we don't necessarily, as frustrated as I am with where we are as a global community in terms of equality, sometimes we don't realize how much ground we've covered in a reasonably short space of time, and that we just need to keep doing that thing where we look at the ceiling and how do we make that the floor?
Right. It's so true. And depending on which time scale we want to look at for, which part of human life we're trying to change. And, if we think about the Industrial Revolution as one example, a few hundred years it's taken us to get to this point unconsciously, relatively. So in terms
Yeah.
of the impact that we've had in the world. So I have many wonderful colleagues who like to talk about the fact that they are, the COP has been going on for longer than perhaps they've been alive, as one example. I'm sure that many of us have heard that, and that's really true. And I really recognize that sense of frustration with the pace. And I also have to think, 27 years in trying to change the biosphere consciously, we are making the dents that really matter. And I think if you keep trying to, shine a light on the change that is happening, my hope is, and I think the data shows, that we are going to be surprised with where we can get to faster than perhaps we might expect at this point. So I totally get, we have a value at Leaders Quest that we call patient ambition, and we are, really impatient for change, but that we recognize in order to create the space for change, we need to have, a big ambition, but patience with that too, because it does take time to rewire the way that we live and rewire human behavior and human culture.
Absolutely. I like that. I like it somewhat because I'm never about patience. I have none. I have none to give. You'll see in my two children, they have none. And it's because I had none to give to them. However, I think it is about recognizing that incremental change and understanding that that incremental change is momentum. And we shouldn't discount that out of hand because it means that we are making progress. And the Conference of the Parties, the UN's biggest climate conference that has been going on, the 28th iteration will take place this year. That, it's baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. And yes, we want to run. And yes, by 28, you should be running. However, there's a lot that we should look back on and recognize in the building of that momentum. If we don't recognize the progress that we've made, we run the risk of eliminating it because we don't recognize that we have done something good.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and my hope is that. Oh, sorry, you go.
No. Go ahead. You tell me about your hope because I want to understand. Like, so you get into this first role at Leaders Quest. Like, how do you make that ceiling the floor, and how do you sort of cycle through the roles at Leaders Quest to now be the co-CEO?
I mean, I do have to say I never expected this. So it was quite a surprise. I've been at the organization for 13 years. I came in with a communications role, and then I quickly evolved to do the whole spectrum of our work. And when the opportunity came up last year, initially I'd thought for a solo CEO. I didn't put my hand up, and I didn't think I would be the right person. And when the invitation came to be a co-CEO, suddenly everything changed for me. And I think this is really interesting. I think that I'm really clear on certain things that I feel quite confident in, and other things I really think I've got big gaps. I think that's part of being human. But my sense of wanting to do this role was really about seeing the opportunity for partnership with my co-CEO, who I've known since I began. And we have an amazing relationship. And I think it has really opened up the opportunity for me to step into this more. And I recognize that, there are different co-CEO models in different organizations. Men and women have done it. I know that there is a bit of a trend, I understand, with women doing this role. And sometimes I wonder about that as you talk about the sort of the progression. what feels great to me is about doing it as a team, and recognizing that I can do that as a team and not feeling I need to do it on my own. I think I'd be very, I mean, there are a number of times we've been in this role now 2 months, and we say to each other, we wouldn't be here if the other wasn't here. And I think that feels really cool. I think it's really great to be able to do this as a duo.
But to be devil's advocate a little bit, and just going back on what you're saying, that women we tend to be more collaborative and tend to want to do those kinds of things. Is it us not necessarily stepping in? And I absolutely believe you 100% that you saw this role and you said, you know what, co-CEO is what feels right to me. But is it that sometimes we're not bold enough as women, wanting to pursue because we feel like, oh, well, I shouldn't, or something feels inauthentic about that? Or is it that we don't see enough models of sole CEOs as women, and so we think, oh, well, there are gaps to fill? Or is it that we tend to undervalue our contribution and thus feel like there needs to be more shoring up? So talk me through what your thoughts are. And I appreciate, and I absolutely believe you. I've known you long enough to know that your judgment is impeccable. So if you believe that this was something you wanted to do as a co-CEO, but I also want to make sure that we are mindful about making those choices, and not just making those choices because we're afraid of a challenge.
Mm-hmm. It's a really great question, and certainly there are many incredible women in solo leadership roles, right?
Yeah.
I think it's just the co-CEO model is quite a unique one, and interestingly in different sectors, and so in finance there have been a lot of co-CEO models, and with a lot of men as well. So I think the thing I'm reflecting on at the moment is collaboration, and the reason for that is, I think as we continue to evolve the work that we do at Leaders Quest, we recognize more and more that we've got to work in radical collaboration with all sorts of organizations. And sometimes that means thinking about, what is it the best that I can bring? How do we work with people who might feel quite different, and might be some, tensions, organ rejection? And I've been reflecting a lot on this in terms of, what it is that we need to achieve in the world. And so I'm just playing with that as I think about this question of leadership, certainly for this organization. So I recognize all of the data that shows that women often hold themselves back for different reasons, and that might be for putting their hand up for a promotion, putting their hand up for a pay rise, and I think that's really important for us to have open eyes to.
Yeah.
My sense is this choice is about doing things together is better than alone in terms of collaboration and the mix of skills. And I think that's why I'm doing this. But I think it's a really good call out. And I think that women have to keep encouraging each other to kind of really, look at ourselves fully, and to, not feel afraid from stepping up and into, all of who we are.
I loved, and from the first time I heard the term radical collaboration, and I think maybe this is a way of helping us to understand how that works. But describe, from your perspective, radical collaboration for me, because I feel like it is something that is so necessary in our world today, and maybe these co-CEO models are some of the ways that we can radically collaborate. But it's funny, in one of the things that you said that really surprised me, when you said that the role for you was a surprise. I'm surprised by that, because I think by the second or third time I met you, you're so dynamic, you're so thoughtful and smart. I was like, oh my gosh, this woman should be running this organization. And so when the announcement came, I was like, oh my gosh, this is fun. This is fantastic because, you have that passion, that compass, that I see where this is going. And this is such, you're so clear-eyed about the future and the kind of future we need to create. I was like, oh my gosh, wonderful. And to hear that it was a surprise to you, and I would bet that many of the other people who've engaged with you, it was absolutely no surprise when the notice came out. So, how are we as such phenomenal characters, like someone like you, how are you surprised by this? But tell me about the radical collaboration, and then tell me about how could you miss that you were such a natural for this?
So on radical collaboration, the way I see it is that it is collaboration across difference. So across different types of people, across sectors, across communities. And it's radical because it's challenging, it's essential, and it's not been done before. I think we're very good at collaborating with people who are like us.
Yeah.
So, it really requires bridge building, and being willing to let go, to open up, to share, to face really difficult things that come up when we work with communities that are very different. And I do see the co-CEO model and the leaders quest culture as a kind of microcosm of that,
Yeah.
because it is really core to our DNA. On the surprise, I think it goes back to this organic approach to my career in the world. I didn't know what I would be doing from when I was 20 to 30 and I've never had a traditional career path. I don't even really know if they exist. For maybe, I say that,
Sure.
I think everybody, when I ask them about their path, everybody has a really unusual, unique path, even if it might seem like on the outside it's a more standard approach. So I think for me, I never quite knew where I would get to next, and I didn't fit one category. And so I think it's more about that rather than thinking I wasn't good enough, but
Okay,
just
good.
more that I'm very led by what I love to do.
Yeah.
And I'm very lucky that each time I find myself in a position to do something I just really love. And I'm never quite sure where it will take me next. But I figure that's okay because I'm enjoying it and I think that's where the surprise came from. I hadn't thought what
Okay.
next because I was really loving what I was already doing.
Very nice. I love that. And so tell me about what's the best advice you've been given?
Ooh. So I'll give you the best advice, but there's also another side to it.
Sure.
My dad used to say, if you have a job you love, you'll never work a day of your life.
Hmm.
And I think it comes from Confucius. It's not his quote, and it has been really fundamental to the choices that I've made. But it also drove me nuts for many years because I kept thinking, what's the thing I love? I don't know what I love, and flip-flopping and always feeling like I would never find my place.
Hmm.
And then I heard the opposite advice, which apparently was given to a well-known Australian actor, Russell Crowe. I've never
Ah.
quoted Russell Crowe before, but I was told that his dad said to him, apparently Russell Crowe loves cars. And so his dad said, if that's your passion, don't turn it into your job. Go and do what you're good
Ah,
at. So
yeah.
this is the
Oh,
opposite. So he went off and did acting because he was good at acting, and cars are his passion. Now, don't quote me on this. This is what I've heard. But what I find is this is a very interesting, dual approach. And I realized that for many years I really struggled because I was trying to find the thing I loved.
yeah.
And sometimes that made it difficult. I fell out of love with that thing, which was music.
Yes.
So it's an interesting piece of advice, but I guess maybe the lesson for me is not to take things as so black and white. I told my dad many years later how difficult it had made, some period in my life. He's like, well, maybe it was just not right. Why did you worry about it so much?
that is, and I've heard that, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But I also know several friends who are either chefs or artists, and they've fallen out of love with food or fallen out of love with art because it's work now, and it's you have to produce and you have to do this thing that was once just something that was in your heart. So I kind of feel like I agree on both fronts. You want to do something that you love enough because that is, you want to show up every day enthusiastic and excited about it. But there's certain things that are so core to you that maybe keeping that safe and keeping that separate from work makes sure that it remains something that's pleasure and good and that you always look forward to doing because it's not, deadline. You've gotta produce this thing. Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
I think that's good. I also loved what you were talking about, with radical collaboration, and I had never heard it described in that way. And I think that that was a piece missing for me about it being bridging the gaps. And it's almost about if you are too comfortable in your collaboration, that maybe it isn't radical collaboration. Maybe you need to there needs to be a feeling of discomfort. And I actually attended this talk that Michelle Obama had done, and she said, if you're at a table and everyone looks like you and is saying the same things, you're at the wrong table. And I feel like maybe that's what radical collaboration is about. There has to be that tension because that's where all of the best ideas come from. That's where all of the change and the new ways of thinking would come from. It can't just be, well, yeah, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. That's radical collaboration. It just isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And I think that, change comes from that creative tension. And
Yeah.
I also think that I have seen collaborations that have got stuck in the other way. So I
Yeah.
think there's a real interesting work to be done about the right type of diversity that is going to challenge and enable progress. And
Yeah.
I imagine that at different points in time, you've got to so you expand to have greater diversity, you make progress, but then you've then got to think about, okay, well, we've got comfortable, where's the next edge? But
Yeah.
if you do too much too soon, and this came up in some of the work that we did with Adam Kahane, who is a wonderful author on collaboration, that if you try to just include everybody all at once, you can get
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah.
So there's a real balance to playing that edge, I think.
Yeah, and just, incrementally sort of bringing in new voices, new ways of thinking, and to make sure that you have um, enough of a solid idea so that you're building around a core versus, well, let's just throw everything at it and see where we land up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there are some wonderful examples where, I think people often think if you want to be really inclusive, you're going to slow everything down. And so, if you exclude, you'll go faster. And there are some
Hmm.
wonderful examples that I come across on the ground that demonstrate you can do both. But it is
Ah,
about doing both well.
yes. Oh, I love that because there's the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I absolutely believe that in this, certainly in climate action, we have to go far and fast, and we
And
have to
fast.
figure that out. And so we can't sort of uh, we can't we can't sort of sacrifice speed for distance, or the other way around. I think what it it may, there's that triangle that says, it's either going to be fast or good or cheap. And you can only have two. So the thing that we're going to sacrifice is cheap apparently, and I'm okay with that. If the transition is expensive, but we end up in a much better place, then why not? Why not? It'll create jobs. It's not like we're just bringing cash. It'll create jobs. It'll create new opportunities. It'll create such a bigger, brighter world.
Mm-hmm. And the money's there, right? It just
Yeah,
needs to be directed in the right way.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell me, across your career, your varied career with, and especially given the work that you're doing with Leaders Quest, I'd like to end on what are you most proud of from your career? What work you've done? And I know that Some of the stuff that you've done, you can't necessarily talk about, unfortunately. But I've been in some incredible rooms with you, so I know that you guys are doing phenomenal work. But what are you most proud of that you can talk about?
It's a very interesting question. And my mind is flitting. I wasn't ready for this. Some of the things are the kind of big conversations.
Hmm.
And so, for those who might be aware of the conversations leading up to COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh, I was really privileged to support on some work with non-state actors, including you, Racquel, on how non-state actors, so businesses, investors, cities, and regions, can address climate losses and damages. And I think this was one of the first time those conversations had been had, because, of course, the very big contentious and rightly so argument has been about how the global north, how the rich countries support the most vulnerable countries that are suffering climate losses. And so I think that felt very edgy and meaningful in very small closed doors to support the process leading up to COP. And then I think on the other side, I would look to some of the programs that we do on the ground, the quests that we hold. One of my favorite quests was in South Africa the year before COVID, actually. And it was with a technology company, a group of 25 global leaders on the ground in Joburg for a week. And it's not so much a kind of single moment, but that program over the week of really exploring life and leadership at a very broad level in South Africa. And it's such an incredible place to learn, to learn about identity and to learn from people who find such incredible agency and courage. And to also grapple with, working with some of the big companies, how they undergo transformation. So how does transformation happen in different societies? So we had a very sort of macro view of South Africa, but then we also work with the leaders to look at what is the role that technology can play in the digital transformation underway around the world, but particularly in South Africa. How does technology support informal workers and the gig economy, and holding conversations that were, so personal and intimate with young people who have done incredible things to pull themselves out of very challenging situations, to get themselves into tech jobs, and what is it this technology company can do in terms of thinking about how it navigates that purpose and profit that you talked about at the start. And some really exciting initiatives have come off the back of that. So I'd say that's another sort of two quite different examples that I can't quite choose from.
Fabulous, fabulous. And I actually got married in South Africa, so one of my favorite places on the planet.
Very, very special.
Yeah, yeah. And so much history, both, good and bad. And I think that there's an honesty to that, right? Because that place has had so much innovation and ingenuity and activism, but so much sadness and so much to overcome and still working through. So I think really, really interesting place to be, and you feel that dichotomy when you're there. It's like in the soil.
Right.
Definitely. All
And
right.
so much to offer the world in terms of all of the themes that we're grappling with now around real diversity and inclusion, or democracy. I think they have so many gifts to share with us in terms of what they've been through and learned.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this has nothing to do with anything else, but such incredible style. One of the most stylish places I've ever been to. Everything from, the coffee shop to how people dress, to the way that they do construction. Everything's just a lot of like style and the sense of being and elegance. I absolutely love South Africa. So with that, I want to thank you for sharing this time with me, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. I love, how do we make the ceiling the floor? Because we just have to keep climbing up, and we have to recognize that once you enter the next level, it's how do you get to the next level, but working on something with passion and feeling that sense of purpose and being willing to collaborate radically and understanding what that means and how, it isn't just about, okay, well, I'm reaching out to someone else, but it is about making sure that that collaboration does include a bit of tension so that new things are happening as a result of that collaboration. Thank you so much for, helping us to understand about creating a space to understand how you think and how you feel so that it is more of a discovery journey. Your leadership is more of a discovery journey than something that someone is telling you what it should be or telling you what it is. And also looking at being a CEO from a different perspective. Maybe a co-CEO model is a good model, depending on where you're comfortable and where your skills lie. And that's also a different way of looking at things, and certainly an example of radical collaboration. So thank you all
Thank
so much.
you.
Oh,
No, well, I just want to
thank
say thank you, Racquel, and thank you for all you do, to really lift women up and share their stories in the way that you do. It's such inspiring work.
Thank you. You know what? This is my passion, and so it is not work. And that's probably why it works because I'm not like under a mandate to do it, but I absolutely love it because I think we have such phenomenal voices and such incredible opportunity and diversity in the way that we approach things, in the way that we think, in the way that we execute. And I would just love to see a more diverse and inclusive world for all of us so that we get the best out of everyone. And so, with that, I thank you for joining us for this episode of Getting to the Top. And I encourage you, if you're not already subscribed, to subscribe and join us for the next conversation. And you will find that hopefully, like me, you learn something new each and every single time. Thank you so much. Bye.